Hello. Today I'm going to explain about the economics of an apology. The music down a little bit. So, we have a couple of assumptions we're going to start with. And the first assumption is that forgiveness is a given. Okay? And the second is that means that they forgive if you apologize. Now, the second assumption, which comes up later on when we talk about this, but the second assumption is that the utility, the benefit you get, utility means like benefit or pleasure, that you get from an apology is increasing as the gravity of the offense increases. So if you commit a very strong offense, then the utility from that will be relative to the strength of the offense you made. And this is because a few reasons, but one being that it's also more difficult to apologize. So the cost of apology is also increasing in the offense. Okay, so the components of the argument, right? So there are basically three components. There's a cost of an apology, and that means basically humiliation from admitting fault, right? It requires a person who has a very humble demeanor to acknowledge that they've been wrong. So that's kind of, we'll talk about that later philosophically. But basically it means that you have to have a strong heart or a strong mind. You have to be free from fear. Free from the, hold on, let me try the light in here. Is it better? Maybe not. Yeah. So that means also free from the honor and dishonor that comes with, being alive. And that's what that's getting at. Humiliation, humility, humbleness, being able to acknowledge your faults. It requires a very strong mind. Next thing, the utility of an apology is the fact that you get to amend the relationship and you are given a second chance. So you, when you make an offense against an individual or an institution, you actually cause a disconnect, a breaking of the relationship, right? But that relationship, that disconnect can be the cleavage, right, can be mended through an apology. And that's the utility of an apology, okay? And that utility is also increasing in the gravity of the apology, gravity of the offense. And finally, we have X, which equals the offensive act. So we have, A1, forgiveness is a given. A2, U of A, utility of apology, A being apology, is increasing in gravity of offense. Components of the argument, I guess I should have put down A as apology, but I didn't. Oh well. Cost of A, C of A, humiliation from admitting fault. U of A, utility of an apology, is the, what does it say there? Healing the relationship, be giving a second chance, and then there's, right down here, X. X is the offensive act. So let's look at what that looks like. Now you can see that, yeah, you can see, okay? So we have U of A, so it's basically, I'm not studying economics in quite a while. I've not read the literature or textbooks or anything. And therefore my sense of the terminology is weak. But this is a certain, I think it's like a stepwise offense, stepwise utility function. So for an offense which is less than the cost, right? The utility is 0. We'll talk about that in a second. And when the X is greater than the cost of X, right, the utility from A is the X minus the C of X. Again, remember X, the offense is what do you call that? There's a word for that. But basically it's increasing in the, U of A is increasing in X. Yeah? The utility of the apology is increasing as X becomes a greater offense. So when X is less than the cost of X, you don't apologize. That's basically what that means. Talk about that a little bit later. There's obviously exceptions. When X is greater than the cost of X, the utility function is X minus C of X. Now X can take any form. It can be an integer involved in that. This is just very basic rudimentary rough draft of the economics of an apology, right? So we're not going to get into the details yet. We could talk about that later. Now let's look at a graph. I'll get over here. It's very simple what we got here. We have U of A, right, increasing in X. Yeah? So x is on the x horizon, which is convenient. U of A is of course, that's also very much, yeah, my economics isn't that far off. So what we have here is a dotted line, right? This is basically x. This is the utility of the apology minus the cost. It's a dotted line. Now, when we have a particular point here, this is like the gravity of the offense right here, the x in red. You have a dotted line going up, right? Now the gap here is representing the cost, so it's going to cost you something, right? That's the humility of an apology. It's difficult to acknowledge your faults. People have a hard time with that. In fact, it could be, I don't know if it's a stylized fact, but it could be that the greater your pride, the more difficult it is for you to apologize, to acknowledge your faults, basically is what we're talking about. And so that's how it works, basically, very simple, right? Cost is there right here, so this is the actual utility of an apology, because it's x minus a. Very simple, linear, function, very simple. Let's talk about a few things we didn't get in here. One thing is that the strength of the heart, right? The ability you have, the integrity of the individual, the actor has in acknowledging that if apology has an intrinsic value, it clears your conscience, right? The intrinsic value is that you know it should be done, so you do it. It clears your conscience. And you have the strong enough sense of morality, a strong enough integrity that even if X, right, is less than the cost of X, you do it anyway. You apologize anyway. Now, I haven't implemented that into the model because I want to make a very simple model to begin with, right? So even if the cost of X, so because an individual's integrity varies across a population, sample, or population, whatever it may be, there's variation there. Not everybody apologizes. And people have a different cost of apology, right? But as your sense of integrity grows stronger and your sense of morality becomes stronger, then there's a greater probability that you will apologize even when C of X is greater than X. So even when there's no utility involved, even when the offense is so grave that you know the relationship can never be mended, right? There will be no second chance. You do it anyway because you know it should be done. And what is that you're doing? You're restoring faith in humanity in this individual who is offended by your act. They may never trust you again, but their faith in humanity is mended because they see here's somebody who's apologized. Here's an example of humanity, right? This is a very important point. We may not be able to make a very big global difference, but when we work an effort which is local, right? Local, we work on changing ourselves, we actually affect the world around us. And this is just a small example of that. Right, so then the next thing I'm going to talk about is probability. Now, the probability that you've been outed. You're right. So what does that mean? The probability. So this is not. We don't have to look at this anymore. The probability that your offense has been known. So if your offense hasn't been known, it's a lot less likely that you'll apologize because there's nothing. You're not going to heal the relationship hasn't been burned, right? Because the person hasn't found out that you offended them, right? So the probability of, but if they have found out, they might not tell you. You may not really have scientific evidence, and they may not be able to prove their point to a grand jury, but they know it in their heart, right? So you may be able to kind of weasel around with more lies. If you're ever confronted with the truth, you might be able to kind of like, weasel around the truth and just with more lies and sort of maintain the shadow of a relationship. Not the real thing, but the shadow of it. Now, probability that if they do know and you apologize, of course, then it has less effect, right? Because you're obliged to apologize, right? Because you've been found out. So then, since you've been found out, it's almost like your utility is greater than zero most of the time. So in other words, you have something to gain. When you have not been found out, there's nothing, you've not lost anything. But when you found out, you have lost. So there's a greater need to apologize, right? Because you've lost something. Whereas if you have not been found out, you haven't lost anything. So this is something people do when they ask, what have I done? right? That means, well, it could mean a few things. It means they honestly don't know, or they're kind of sociopathic. They know, but they want to find out how much you know that they've done. They want to see where their wiggle room is, or they want to simply have you present an argument so that they can defeat it with another lie. You have to kind of think about what I said there. There's a lot there going on, but you have to kind of think about it. I don't want to get into the details of it. So this is what's happening. I've explained the utility of an apology. There's nothing here to explain more. If you have any questions, please post them in the comments. Thank you very much. Have a nice day. Shabbat Shalom.